Do not buy this land. Do not buy this type of land. That's what you hear a lot of people here down here in the South on the Gulf Coast, and especially here in southern Louisiana, because not only do you deal with hurricanes and tornadoes and of course flooding, but you also got the storm surge. But there's a lot to know. Well, look, like a lot of things, if something seems too cheap, it's probably for a specific reason. And like anyone, when you're selling a property, you're supposed to disclose any adverse facts and information on the property. And an adverse fact would be that the property holds water or floods. But you want to make sure you do your due diligence. But it's more than just flood insurance that you need to worry about. Easements, encroachments, right-of-ways, mineral rights, there's a lot to know about a piece of land. And if you don't know and don't do your due diligence, things can go south really fast and literally cost you thousands of dollars. However, when it comes to land and it comes to flood zone, that's probably one of the most important to me. Now, there are different flood zones. There's A, B, C, and X flood zones, and there's different variations of a flood zone. A lot of people get misconstrued that if you're in an A flood zone, then you're in a 100-year floodplain. That's not the case. So look, there's just something about water that makes it really appealing, whether it's a lake water or river water, like right here on the Tchefuncte River in Louisiana, or if on the Gulf Coast and you have that crystal clear blue water. At the end of the day, you have to not only worry about rain, but you gotta worry and be concerned about rising water from wind. The way it works with flood zone A, for example, if you're in what they call a 100-year floodplain, it's not that it's gonna flood every 100 years. It basically just says that that property has a 1% chance of flooding in any given year. Now, you can build a home, put a home, do anything you want on any property that is a flood zone. You got to watch out for the wetlands, because you got to get permission, Corps of Engineers, you got to do abatement. It's next to impossible to do that. I would never recommend even buying a piece of property that's owned and considered wetlands if you think you're going to build a structure on it. If you're going to buy it just to have it and do whatever with it, that's fine, but you can't put so much a pebble without getting crazy kinds of permission and paying money from the Corps of Engineers if you want to build on what they call a designated wetland. Now, how you would build a property on a piece of land that is in a flood zone, and say flood zone A, is they do what they call a base flood elevation, and you get an elevation certificate. So if you're buying a piece of property, you want to make sure that the seller has an elevation certificate, or you put in the contract that you reserve the right to get an elevation certificate performed on the property before you close. That way you'll know exactly the base flood elevation on the property. And look, it's very important that you get the base flood elevation on the property, because that base flood elevation will tell you how high your home needs to be off the ground in terms of building that. So for example, if you're in flood zone A and the base flood elevation is 6 feet off the ground, then you've got to build your property 6 feet plus 1 more foot off of that base elevation stage. So you got to make sure that when you buy that land, you're going to build that house. A lot of times people are like, oh, well, I'm just going to put a 3-foot crawl space on it or put it on a slab. Got to be careful. Now, another reason why I say don't buy this property, and it's not so much as don't buy that property, but you don't buy that property without doing what they call your homework, your due diligence. It says that in the contract. If it doesn't say that in the contract, write it in to give you at least 7, if not 14 days to find out as much as you can about that property. You want to get the covenants and restrictions. You need to get the deed restrictions. What's the minimum size house you can build? What's the maximum you can do on the property? You want to know anything and everything about that property before it becomes yours. The other interesting thing is trees, and you would think, well, it's just a tree, but you got to understand, when you've got a tree that literally is possibly 300 years old, when you have massive oak trees like this, you can't just cut those trees down. So don't think you're going to buy a piece of property and you're going to put your house right there and there's an oak tree right here. You got to make sure that these trees can be removed. I can tell you, an oak tree like that, you'll never get permission to take it out. Now, by permission, I mean from your county or parish that the property resides in, because of course you got to pull a permit when you go to build on the property. So now you bought the property, you know what flood zone that's in the property, you know what trees are on the property. Now you also have to look and consider, are there any easements on the property? An easement is where basically someone can encroach and go across your property to get to their property. A lot of people call it a right-of-way. So you may be as wide as 10 feet, it could be as wide as 100 feet, but if there's a right-of-way on that property, you got to make sure and know and understand that oftentimes people will buy a big piece of property and then they'll subdivide it, and there's only 200 feet of road frontage, and then they'll put a house on the front and then 3 houses on the back, but they have to go across the front property to get to the back property. And you just have to know, if that's something that doesn't interest you and you wouldn't like sharing part of your land, even though you own it, there's a recorded easement. You have to know that it will pretty much always be there. Another really important factor that could absolutely cost you a lot of money is encroachments on the property. You want to make sure no one is encroaching on the property. You do that with a survey. Now, properties are surveyed whenever they're divided and subdivided out, and that survey is recorded at your parish or county seat. The Register of Deeds office will have that. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. Really just depends on the age of the property and when it was surveyed. Oftentimes, if a property was surveyed before, say, 1969, there's not a copy of that. Now, quite simple, because I like everything simple. I just try to put it in simple, easy terms where you can know and understand. And if you like these videos, please leave a comment below. If you have any opinions or questions or concerns or anything you want to hear me do videos about, please let me know. My name once again is Wayne Turner. I've been brokering and selling, investing in real estate now for 30 years. So what if you found the perfect piece of property? You checked the flood zone, you've done a survey, you've gotten everything that you need to, you've walked the property, but right before closing you realize that, wait a minute, there's an encroachment on the property. There's someone encroaching the property. In other words, they are on your property. And listen, oftentimes homeowners that may be encroaching upon a property, they don't even know they're encroaching upon the property. They may have bought the property from someone, and they might have bought the property from someone, and they just figured that was the land. And if they didn't get a survey, they don't realize where their land starts and ends and begins. You get it? So this is why you want to spend the $600 or $2,000, depending on how big the property is and how much they have to trek through the property, like trekking through the woods, literally, to put down stakes to find the pins where they surveyed the property previously, so they'll know exactly where your property begins and where it ends. Man, I love these big oak trees. Now, an easement, you want to make sure that no one is going across your property, but that's how you find out no one is going across your property, simply a survey. Once the survey is done, they'll stake the property lines. You'll know exactly where it is. Now, here's what you do if someone's encroaching upon your property. Someone's encroaching upon your property, you'll want to make sure that you write up a letter, you send it to the owner of the property, the person that owns the property that's encroached upon your property, with a copy of your survey, and you kindly inform them that you're the new buyer on that property. You want to be as nice, as kind as possible. You can hand deliver the letter. I'd recommend that. I recommend getting to know your neighbors. I also recommend, if you're going to mail it, even though you hand deliver it, you still want to mail it, because if you mail it return receipt mail requested, the post office will send it to them and they have to sign for it. So once they receive it, they sign it. That way, in a court of law, you have proof that someone has signed the piece of paper that you sent them, explaining to them that they're encroaching on your property. Now, I'll put a link below here so you can go to the FEMA maps and pull up a property address, and it will show you and tell you what flood zone that property is. You have A, B, C, and X flood zones. Flood zone A, and there's different variations of A, is the highest flood zone. In other words, that's the zone that's most likely to flood, and I'd mentioned a 1% over any given year, 100-year floodplain. Now, if you're in B, flood zone B, you're not as high of a risk, and your flood policy, flood insurance, is not going to be that much more expensive than C. C is the lowest, and then X is even lower than that. So C is not technically the lowest, but C and X are the lowest. Now, keep in mind, these are still flood zones. They're still in floodplain areas. They're just in 500-year floodplains instead of 100-year floodplains. Now, many of you may know I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and when Nashville, Tennessee, there's not a whole lot of flooding. However, several years back, they had torrential rains, and there was some flooding. Now, that occurred because the Corps of Engineers said they didn't open up the dam quick enough, because they have this thing called the Tennessee Valley Authority. They build dams in between mountains and hills. They dam up water. They take property by eminent domain. They build lakes and streams, and next thing you know, they create electricity from that water. Yes, and that's correct. If you don't open up a dam quick enough, the damn water is going to flow everywhere and flood everybody. So you don't want that to happen, but it could happen. That's why you have a lot of property that may be right on the lake or right on the water, and that be a man-made lake that was put in 70 years ago, but it's technically not in a flood zone because it's controlled by the Corps of Engineers. So a lot of people have heard about this flood that happened, this hurricane that went through. Her name was Katrina. She was strong, she was mean, she wasn't lean, that's for sure. That baby was wide, and she tore up all kind of stuff, not just here in New Orleans, but a lot of places are called levee protected, which makes me want to explain that even though a property is below sea level, it still can be in flood zone X because it is levee protected. And I know that, like, well, the levee broke in 2005, but we still sell property all the time where literally you can be standing in the front yard and looking up at a riverboat. Now, another thing that we have to consider, and Lord forbid you can't forget about this, is mineral rights. Oftentimes, whether you're down here on the Gulf Coast, there is a lot of oil. I don't think people realize how much oil is out in the Gulf of Mexico. Quick story, I was on a cruise one time years ago, and I looked and there were lights everywhere, and we were out in the Gulf of Mexico. And I looked at my wife and I said, "What is that?" And she said, "Those are oil rigs." I was blown away by how many oil rigs. So the purpose in that is to let you know, make sure the seller, when they sell the property, they don't retain their mineral rights. In other words, they relinquish, they give you their mineral rights. You got to make sure there's no mineral rights to the property that's obtained by anybody, because you want to make sure that that land from here to the center of the earth is your land, and no one can encroach upon your property or anything like that into the future to take what could be under that dirt. Yeah, and I know I said it. I said crude oil. I said oil. You got to have oil, and oil runs off cars. But I think a lot of people fail to realize that oil creates everything. There's this product that they started making years ago, and a lot of people don't realize it, and it's made from crude oil, and that product is called plastic. So yeah, when I talk about mineral rights, there's a lot of people that have bought 100-acre tracts of land, and all of a sudden they get a phone call and say, "Hey, do you mind if we pay you $80,000 a month to drill oil on your land?" True story. Now, that wasn't my land, because I probably wouldn't be filming this right here in southern Louisiana. You'd see my butt on the Bahamas somewhere. But it does happen, and it has happened, and there's stories out there. So the moral of the story is, don't let anyone keep the mineral rights to the property that you buy. I hope you like these videos and enjoy these videos. Subscribe, leave us a comment. Most importantly, let us know, is there something that we can do, produce more videos to help you. This comes from a lot of information I learned years ago that you learn by trial and error, but if you can also pick another person's brain that's already been there and done that, it will save you a whole lot of time. And at the end of the day, who doesn't want to be smarter at their craft, or smarter at whatever it is they're trying to do, be, have, and achieve in life? So to sum it up, check the flood zone. Make sure you're not in a wrong flood zone, and make sure that you know what the flood insurance is going to run you on a yearly basis once you buy that property. Make sure there's no back taxes, liens, encumbrances on the property. Make sure there's no easements on the property. Make sure no one's encroaching upon the property. Make sure you keep your mineral rights on the property. Do your diligence. And at the end of the day, if it seems too good to be true, it just may be. But it just may not be. So do your due diligence and have a good day.